Nirvana is this moment seen directly. There is nowhere else than here. The only gate is now. The only doorway is your own body and mind. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing else to be. There's no destination. It's not something to aim for in the afterlife. It's simply the quality of this moment.
Just this room where we are. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to who's there. Pay attention to what isn't known there. Pay attention to what is known there. Pay attention to what everyone is thinking and feeling. What you're doing there. And pay attention. Pay attention.
For weeks, the Buddha remained near the Bodhi tree, peaceful and serene. He was tempted to retire into a profound solitude, instead of trying to teach others what it had taken him 6 long years to discover for himself.
He wants to stay there. He's very happy. He doesn't want to go out. He says to himself, no one is going to understand this. You know, people are going to think I'm crazy. They're going to think I'm nuts.
Buddha saw the nature of the people. Envy and jealousy and strong negative mental states. All the people in the world, they are like the fishes wriggling in the very shallow water. So Buddha, he himself, afraid to teach the people.
The myth is that a god comes to the Buddha. Brahma comes on his knees and says, please, we need you. Why don't you try talking about what you just understood? Because the world needs it. The gods need it and the men need it, you know? People need it.
And then Buddha decided to give his teachings. Because of the great compassion, it's not an ordinary compassion.
When you feel the feelings of others, you automatically don't want them to feel bad. You feel the feeling of your hand, you don't put it in the oven. I mean, you're not being compassionate to your hand, you just feel the pain, so you don't want to put it there. So you feel others' pain, you're going to do your best to help them alleviate it.
When somebody becomes enlightened, something blooms in his heart. It's like a flower blooms and it cannot hold the fragrance. It has to naturally release. So it's like he naturally had to release his radiance. He has to share this joy that was in his heart.
35 years old, the Buddha would devote the rest of his life to bringing his teachings, the Dharma, the fundamental laws of all things, into the world. But as he had feared, it would not be easy. As he set off to share what he had learned, he met a wandering ascetic. "Who is your guru?" the ascetic asked him. The Buddha said he had no guru, that he had attained enlightenment on his own. "It may be so," the ascetic said, and walked away. On his first attempt to teach, the Buddha had failed.
Buddha meets someone who doesn't see anything special about him, because the awakened Buddha doesn't look any different from anybody else. He is ordinary. Buddhism is not about being special. Buddhism is about being ordinary, and it is not about the continual exudation of bliss. It is about walking a normal human life with normal human beings, doing normal human things, and this reminds you that you yourself might be a Buddha at this moment. The person you're looking at might be one. It's an interesting practice. Just each person you see as you walk down the street, Buddha, 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 Buddha.
From Bodh Gaya, the Buddha walked west nearly 200 miles and crossed the Ganges River. He was still searching for a way to explain to others what he feared was unexplainable, the path to the enlightenment he himself had experienced. In a deer park in Sarnath, not far from the Ganges, he would try again. His 5 former companions were still practicing the austerities he himself had abandoned. From far off they saw me coming, and on seeing me made a pact with one another, the Buddha recalled. Friends, here comes Siddhartha, living luxuriously, straying from his ascetic practice. He doesn't deserve to be bowed down to.
These are his buddies who were just disappointed and disgusted with him for giving in after they'd all been trying to starve themselves into enlightenment. So they're a little distrustful at the beginning.
They refer to him as an equal, and he then tells them, no, that's not the term you should use when you refer to a Tathagata, to a being who's gone beyond. And so he sets them straight. And they then become the first people to hear the content of what he realized under the Bodhi tree.
His first teaching would later be called Setting in Motion the Wheel of the Dharma, because it brought the Buddha's message into the world for the first time. He did not propound a dogma. Instead, he spoke from his own experience, out of his own heart. He had known the abandon of the sensualist and the rigors of the ascetic. Now, he would disavow both of them.
The Buddha said, I've discovered a new way, and it's not the path of asceticism, and it's not the path of sensory indulgence. It's the middle way. What the Buddha was always doing was saying everything needs to be balanced. So, the middle way was always balancing between, excesses on this side, excesses on the other side.
Fair goes the dancing when the sitar is tuned. Tune us the sitar, neither high nor low, and we will dance away the hearts of men. But the string too tight breaks, and the music dies. The string too slack has no sound, and the music dies. There is a middle way. Tune us the sitar, neither low nor high, and we will dance away the hearts of men.
The path to enlightenment lay along the middle way, the Buddha taught, and the ascetics listened. Now he would answer the question that 6 years before had provoked his spiritual journey, the question of suffering.
Buddhists don't have a creation story. There is no creator deity. It's not really of interest. It's not an issue. What's of interest is the problem of human suffering and the solution to human suffering. Pretty much everything else, right, is beside the point.
The Buddha's analysis of suffering came in the form of what have come to be called the Four Noble Truths.
There is no commandments or anything. The first noble truth is that there is suffering in this world. Generally, this suffering has been mistranslated.
Suffering is not entirely accurate to the word that the Buddha probably used. It means something closer to dissatisfaction, that, we're never quite happy, and if we are, that's gone in an instant anyhow.
And he says that this suffering, this unsatisfactoriness, doesn't arise by itself. It has causes. Our own mind causes it.
While the second noble truth asserts that suffering has a cause, the third noble truth makes an astonishing claim.
You really can be free of suffering by understanding the cause of suffering. Nobody tells you that. And so that was a huge announcement.
The problem, Buddha taught, is desire. How to live with the confused and entangling desires of our own minds.
People often misunderstand Buddhism as saying, in order to wipe out suffering, you have to wipe out desire. If that was what the Buddha was saying, then where does the desire for enlightenment fit in? The Buddha is saying, be smart about your desires.
Desire must be there. Without desire, how can lead our life? Without desire, how can achieve Buddhahood? Strong desire to become Buddha. But desire to harmful, that bad.
With the fourth and final noble truth, the Buddha laid out a series of instructions for his disciples to follow, a way of leading the mind to enlightenment called the Noble Eightfold Path, the cultivation of moral discipline, mindfulness, and wisdom.
They are, as I like to think of them, a set of possible recipes that you can try on your own life and see which one makes the best soup.
The Buddha didn't speak for long, but when he was finished, the 5 skeptical ascetics had been won over. They became his first disciples. Word quickly spread of the sage teaching in the deer park at Sarnath. Hundreds came to hear him and became disciples too. Many were wealthy merchants or their sons, living just 5 miles away in a thriving trading center on the Ganges, the holy city of Benares. Today, Benares is the most sacred city in all of India, as it has been for millennia. Even before the time of the Buddha, pilgrims came here to worship their gods and bathe in the holy river of heaven.
You see people purifying themselves, bathing in the Ganges. You see priests performing rituals. You see corpses, because that's the best place to end one's life. So you see going on there a great range of religious activity, and much of it of the type that does go back to the Buddha's time.
Many of today's sacred ceremonies on the Ganges echo the ancient practices of the Vedic priests, the Brahmins. In the Buddha's day, only the Brahmins could mediate between the gods and men. Only they could conduct the holy rituals that were said to preserve the universe itself. Beneath them were the warriors, the caste to which the Buddha belonged. Below them were farmers. At the bottom were the servants, and still lower, outcasts.
Those social groups are not merely social conventions, but rather they're hardwired into the nature of the universe. You're supposed to stay in that group, and the survival of society depends upon your continuing to perform the function associated with that social status.
Caste was irrelevant to the Buddha. So were priestly rituals to preserve the universe. His teachings focused on the universe within.
The Buddha said you could be from any caste. What makes you noble is if you understand reality. You know, if you're a good person, if you're a wise person, then you're noble.
In time, a devoted gathering of monks formed around the Buddha at Sarnath, near the Ganges. Broken stones and fallen pillars mark what remains of what grew to be a vibrant monastic community, the Sangha.
It took the Buddha many, many years to find his way, but he didn't want it to be so hard for people. And so he established a community who could live together and help one another.
In a ceremony evoking the beginning of the Buddha's own spiritual journey, fledgling monks of all ages say goodbye to their families and homes and join the Sangha.
Gacchami Dutiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. I go to the refuge of the Buddha, I go to the refuge of the Dhamma, and I go to the refuge of the Sangha. Sanghang Saranang Gacchami.
The Sangha is an embodiment of Buddha's experiential wisdom. What happens if people practice this thing? Are they truly happy or not? Are they joyful or not? So I think Buddha wanted to also leave a perfect example of his teaching, an alive teaching, a teaching that walks, a teaching that can talk, a teaching that can laugh. So I would say Sangha is just like a living example of Buddha's teaching.
The first Sangha was a radical institution, open to people of every caste and remarkable for the times in which the Buddha lived, to both men and women. The Buddha was part of a culture deeply suspicious of women.
The attitude towards women at the time was very critical, and many things were impossible for them. So that was a very revolutionary thing to do that in that times of India.
By ordaining women as nuns, the Buddha gave women the chance to escape the drudgery of daily life. Life was so hard for most women that entering the Sangha was a liberation, as we know from their ecstatic, heart-rending poems. So freed, so thoroughly freed am I, from my pestle, my shameless husband and his sunshade making, my moldy old pot with its water snake smell. Aversion and passion I cut with a chop. Having come to the foot of a tree, I meditate, absorbed in the bliss. What bliss! Bliss, nirvana, the Buddha taught, could be found in the fleeting moment through the practice of meditation. The Buddha showed his followers how to come to terms with their own roiling thoughts and desires by paying attention to them, by becoming aware, becoming mindful. As an ancient poem counsels, like an archer, an arrow, the wise man steadies his trembling mind, a fickle and restless weapon.
Many times our mind is not peaceful enough. So we realize that perhaps we need to understand more about mind itself and how to balance the emotions, how to balance our mind and try to cultivate more happiness.
The difficulties come from within. One experiences unexpected things from one's mind. Most dangerous skeptical doubts. Doubts about oneself, doubts about the Buddha. Physical is we can get from from the food and from the supplement of vitamins and yeah, and for the mind, this is the only way we have to. Only medicine.
Meditation is not about getting rid of anger, getting rid of lust, or getting rid of jealousy. Even while becoming monk, often we experience angers. It happens. It often happens when people start teasing you like a shaven, bald-headed person. But it gives a good chance for us to realize that, okay, let's see, this anger arises. What is it? What most often happens in our ordinary life is that whenever we experience these emotions, we get stuck into it. It starts twisting us. But Buddhism is going through inside it and getting out of it peacefully. And I think that gives us more joy. And that makes human life more full, more around. It's not like we are not living in partial truth, but it's like whole of things together.
It takes time to comprehend this. And then, by practicing again and again, the practitioner becomes very balanced, and one reaches a state of very strong equanimity. Equanimity towards the physical and mental objects. And this is the base camp for the summit. Enlightenment.
After washing my feet, a disciple said, I watched the water going down the drain. I am calm. I control my mind like a noble thoroughbred horse. Taking a lamp, I enter my cell. Thinking of sleep, I sit on my bed. I touch the wick, the lamp goes out. Nirvana. My mind is freed.
The mind is as restless as a monkey, the Buddha taught. Who you are, what you think of as yourself, is constantly changing. Like a river, endlessly flowing, one thing today, another tomorrow.
There's water in a river, then there's water in a glass, and then the water is back in the air, and then it's back in the river. The water's there, but what is it? That's a way to think about the self in Buddhism. One moment you're angry, the next moment you're laughing. Who are you?
A seed becomes a plant. Wisps of grass are spun into a rope. A trickling stream turns into a river.
The self comes and the self goes. Simply notice how from one moment to another, yourself is actually not as much the same as we think it is.
What the Buddha realizes is that if we can get rid of this fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the self based on egotism, we won't cling to things, we won't screw up everything we do because we're thinking about it in the wrong way.
Once you stop centering your feelings about your feelings on yourself, what naturally arises is simple compassion. Compassion for your own suffering, compassion for the suffering of others.
Even the most abstract of the Buddha's teachings had a practical, ethical dimension. Compassion, the Buddha taught, comes from understanding impermanence, transience, flow, how one thing passes into another, how everything and everyone is connected.
When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that.
This is always connected to that. Everything is connected to everything else. You never live by yourself. You live always within a family, a society, a culture. You constantly interact with other people all the time. So our happiness depends on their happiness as well. How can we be happy if we are the only one happy in just an island of happiness within an ocean of misery? Of course, that's not possible.
Compassion stirred the Buddha to send his monks out into the community. Sworn to chastity and poverty, they wandered the roads, bringing the Buddha's teachings into the world. Go forth, monks, for the happiness of the many, out of compassion for the world. There are beings whose eyes have little dust on them, who will perish if they do not hear the teaching. But if they hear the teaching, they will gain liberation.
The monks exist by begging. We think of begging as kind of a bad thing. Begging in this tradition is a good thing. It's a sign of spiritual purity.
You're not allowed to beg tomorrow's lunch today. Only today's lunch. Then you can't eat from noon until dawn the next day. Then you have to go out and get another lunch. And then in exchange for lunch, you give a lecture. Unless they say we don't want to hear about it, then you don't. But that's the only thing but that forces you to interact with the lay community.
And if you're not serving them, if you're not doing something useful for them, they won't put anything in your bowl, and that will be the end of your community.
The Buddha himself wandered across northeast India, teaching and gathering new disciples everywhere he went. You didn't have to become a monk or a nun to become a Buddhist. The Buddha's teachings were for everyone.